Foundry VTT is an utterly fantastic virtual tabletop that plays incredibly well with D&D 5th edition, and it's because of this that many people love it. But when faced with the absolute horde of 5e compatible mods that are on Foundry, it can be a bit of a daunting task to go through all of them and find the good ones, and more importantly, the ones that will enhance your and your players' gameplay experience. So whether you be a complete beginner or a seasoned veteran when using Foundry VTT, this video is for you, because I hope to introduce you to some mods that will elevate your gameplay experience when playing D&D on Foundry VTT to the next level. So, hello! My name is Naemon, and I'm a professional dungeon master who has been running D&D5e games using Foundry VTT for years at this point, and I've gone through hundreds of different mods, both good and bad, and determined that these mods I'm about to share with you are my top 10 Foundry VTT mods for D&D5e. But before we begin, some quick clarification. Most of the mods that I will be covering in this video were originally created or are specifically designed for D&D5e on Foundry VTT. So I will not be covering generic mods and very popular mods that everyone has and I would definitely recommend getting, such as Dice So Nice, Combat Carousel, or any of the numerous and fantastic mods created by the saint and absolute mod creating legend, Iron Monk. But now that we've cleared it up a little bit, and without further delay, let's dive right in by starting off with my first recommendation at the bottom of my list, Crash's Tracking and Training for 5e. This pretty useful mod adds a tab to all character sheets and NPC sheets and lets you keep track of just about anything and as many things as you want, as long as there is a numerical value attached to it. So let's say you're a tiefling barbarian, and because of backstory reasons, every 10th time you rage, you're temporarily coated in ice, which gives you some sort of a really cool power or bonus, but also comes at a price. Well, with this mod, you can easily keep track of that using this tab on your character sheet. As you can see, you can add a name to the activity, add a category, a description, adjust the current progress, and you can change what kind of progression type it is. So you can make it a fixed value, a check of some kind, or tie a macro to it if you want to get super in-depth and make the check automatic or nearly automatic. Then you can decide what ability, skill, or tool check you want it to be, add a DC if you want to, and of course add the completion target, which probably shouldn't be 300. So here are some cool examples of how you could use this mod. Let's say your character is a cartographer who wants to map out the mysterious land your party is currently adventuring in. Well, then you can create a downtime activity for that, so your character has to make checks throughout the day to draw the map. Or let's say you want to craft an item or something else that may require multiple skill checks. Well, then you can tie a skill check to an activity and roll for it, which determines if you succeed or not, and then the mod automatically adjusts the progress bar. And on top of that, you can add downtime activities to NPC sheets as well. And you may be thinking, okay, well, why would I want to add a downtime activity to an NPC sheet? That seems kind of useless. But it doesn't have to just be a downtime activity. It can be progress for really anything. So if you aren't already using a quest mod, then you can keep track of how many quest items or tasks your party has completed or turned into an NPC for whatever task they've picked up, which is pretty cool. And on top of that, you can even make it to where the NPC sheet represents a city or a faction and how many tasks you've completed for that city or faction. So if you're like me and a game master or a player perhaps who struggles to keep track of that kind of stuff in regards to downtime activities or tasks, then this mod is especially great because you can easily reference it on your character sheet or your NPC sheet to reference how many quests have been completed or how many more checks you need to do or succeed at to complete that item you are crafting, and so forth. But moving on now to number 9, this next mod makes navigating your character sheet during combat super easy and makes combat look super cool. And this mod is Argon Combat HUD. This mod turns the lower section of your screen into this super sleek looking HUD that is inspired by the HUD from the game Solasta. I have used this mod for basically all of my 5e campaigns and specifically my adventures gauged towards beginner players because it makes navigating your character sheet super easy, intuitive, and makes casting spells, using abilities, or attacking super easy because they just line it all up really nice and neat on your combat HUD. And what I especially love about this mod is that it basically means you never have to open your character sheet during combat. All you have to do is either right-click on your character token and click the little symbol of the swords crossed, or find it underneath token controls and activate it that way. It then transforms the whole bottom of your screen into combat mode. On the left, it shows your HP, AC, spell DC, spaces of movement remaining, and you can easily click and drag items or features from your inventory onto one of these little macro bars at the top of your token art. Additionally, it always shows common actions taken during combat, and of course has these awesome buttons that allow you to easily see what features or spells you can use along with how many times you can use them. Plus, if you are a melee character with multiple weapons or items at your disposal, you can swap between the different loadouts you have by simply clicking between them. But maybe you aren't satisfied with the way that the mod looks, or the layout, or the colors, or something like that, right? Well then fear not, because we haven't even touched on the settings for this mod yet. Now, I won't be going over all of these settings in this video, but as you can see, you can change the colors of the HUD, the scale, the position, and even have it fade away if you're not hovering over it. But moving on to number 8 on my list, let's trade 5e. This mod is a relatively simple mod, but thoroughly enhances the player experience. This mod allows players to trade items with one another super easily by simply clicking the little scale symbol either next to your currency or on the far right hand side of an item banner. Then you can select who you want to trade with and send them the item. Then a prompt appears on the recipient screen asking them if they want to accept it or not, and the transaction gets logged in chat as well in case you want to keep track of that kind of stuff. And I've mentioned this before in another video of mine, but it is amazing how many players have come up to me either before or after a game session and said that this mod was their favorite because it allows them to directly interact with the other players despite them not being there physically. Plus, if you're a GM, it's great because it means that you don't have to manually move the items between player sheets or delete it from one player's inventory, then add it to the other player's inventory, or click and drag it over from the compendiums. You can just simply let them take care of it themselves. And of course, there are a couple of other mods that do basically the exact same thing, but this is just the mod that I've stuck with for my D&D5e campaigns because I enjoy it, my players enjoy it, and I feel that it really enhances the player's experience. And speaking of enhancing the player experience, this next mod does just that by allowing your players to summon their familiars or creatures directly from their character sheet and onto the battlefield. This is number 7, the Automated Evocations mod. So I'm pretty sure that someone watching this video has played a character at some point that has had a familiar or a magical summon or something to that effect. Maybe you played a Ranger Drake Warden that could magically summon dragons to fight by your side during combat, or perhaps you were a wizard with a flying cat familiar who you could snap in and out of existence whenever you wanted to. Or perhaps maybe you were a barbarian who found a stone goat figurine that you didn't think was very cool, but then when used, it turns into this giant magical goat that you can ride into combat. But regardless of what kind of a character you may have played in the past, this mod makes summoning those familiars or creatures super easy and makes it look super cool. All you have to do is click this button on your character sheet to open the Automated Evocations window, at which point you or your GM can click and drag your familiar or a creature that you can magically summon from the actors directory into this window, which makes them available for you to summon. And for you GMs out there, make sure that your players have permission to place tokens and actors, otherwise they won't really be able to summon their creatures from their character sheet. And make sure that you've gone into the mod settings and enabled or disabled whichever settings you want. But anyways, once you've gone back into the companion manager, once you've dragged your familiar into this menu, you can then choose what the summoning animation will look like. And trust me, there is an animation for nearly every occasion and familiar. Now that you have it set up, each time you cast a summoning spell, or use an ability, or invoke a magical item that would summon your magical familiar, it normally brings up the companion manager automatically. At which point you can then click on the summon button and place them wherever you want, and voila! This awesome animation plays and your brand new familiar is summoned and ready for battle. Something else that's pretty cool about this mod is that you can change the amount of creatures that are summoned. So if you're a dungeon master and you want the BBEG to summon 3 fire imps at once, then you can do so. And on top of that, something else really cool about this mod is that it's technically not only limited to summoning creatures. You can summon or animate tons of other token or tile placements, but I won't really get into that because it's a tad bit complicated. But if that interests you, then feel free to check out the Automated Evocations GitHub page or video linked below, because the wiki and video do a great job explaining the whole process of adding custom animations and macros. But yeah, familiars and being able to summon them is cool and all, but the real thing that players want is treasure and magic items. But of course, and inevitably, sometimes being an adventurer leads to you picking up a lot of random stuff that can lead to your inventory being super cluttered, especially if you have a bag of holding, and sometimes it can be kind of difficult to keep track of what is in the bag of holding and what isn't, especially on Foundry VTT. And perhaps some of you guys relate to this, but sometimes you just get items and then put them in your inventory and completely forget what is and isn't in the bag of holding. So then that begs the question, how do you keep track of all of these things that you put into your backpack or your bag of holding without having to create an entirely separate actor sheet that is dedicated to being the bag of holding? Well, that's where my 6th mod comes into play, the Item Container mod for 5e. This mod lets you turn any container like a backpack or a bag of holding into a proper container that allows you to drag and drop items into it and out of it. So to get started, all you have to do is go to your character sheet and click the little edit button on the far right hand side of an item banner and navigate to details. Then click and drag whatever you want from your inventory to your bag. And as a heads up, I've noticed that sometimes the mod bugs out with pre-made characters or when you click and drag a normal backpack from the compendium into a character sheet, and the details section of the backpack looks like this instead of this. But don't worry, you can easily fix this by going to the sheet settings right here and making sure that the sheet is actually set to 5e item sheet with bags, and then save the sheet configuration and it normally fixes itself. And something else that's pretty cool in case you're wondering, the mod will automatically normally prevent you from putting something that maxes out the weight of the container into it. So for example, if Akra here finds some plate armor just lying around and wants to shove it into his normal backpack, you can see that he can't because the armor weighs too much. However, if he happens to find a bag of holding lying around as well, then you'll notice that there's no issue putting it into the bag of holding since the bag has a much greater carrying capacity. And just a friendly reminder, make sure that if your Dungeon Master has this mod installed, that you don't forget about the things that you put into your backpack or your bag of holding, because I know that my players, as well as myself, am guilty of this, but there have been times when I've put my things into a backpack or a bag of holding and have completely forgotten about them. But of course, what is the point of a good bag or a good bag of holding if you can't find super cool magic items and then put it into the bag and then completely forget about them? Or what if you're a dungeon master and you want to create your own super cool magical items imbued with their own features and spells? Well, then that's where this next mod comes into play, which is number 5, the Magic Items mod. This mod allows you to create magical items from spells, features, or abilities that belong to your item of choice. So all you have to do is go to an item, edit it, and go to the Magic Item tab and obviously check this box, and then boom, you have access to all of these awesome options to create your perfect magic item. You can change the activation conditions, the max number of charges, if any, and if it reaches 0 charges, you can decide what occurs. But of course, some magic items regain their charges, so you can also change when the item regains charges and how much charges the item gets back. But of course, an item can't be magical without some special features or spells imbued into it. So you can easily do that by clicking and dragging spells or features from the compendium into this little section here, adjust it as needed, and boom, your magic item is complete. And then once you give this item to a player, as long as they meet the activation conditions that you set up previously, then the features or spells will be automatically added to the player's character sheet. But what if you've already made some really cool magic items or have made some really cool homebrew monsters on D&D Beyond and don't want to have to recreate them or manually make them in Foundry? Well, that's where this next mod shines, which is number 4, D&D Beyond Importer. D&D Beyond Importer is a truly amazing mod that allows you to easily import everything from items to spells to monsters to characters and even adventures from D&D Beyond to Foundry VTT with just a few simple clicks. While not all features and options of this mod are free, the most sought after, or arguably the most sought after feature of this mod, which is the character importer, is free. So to import your character, items, spells, monsters, or what have you from your D&D Beyond account, you first have to do a couple of different steps that involve getting a Cobalt key from your D&D Beyond page. But don't worry, because Mr. Primate, the creator of the mod, has a very well-written how-to over on his GitHub page. But once you get the Cobalt key and set it up in the mod, you can then start importing your characters. And now the only thing you have to do is go to a character sheet in Foundry, click the D&D Beyond button next to your character name at the top of the character sheet, copy the URL from your character sheet over on D&D Beyond and paste it here, and finally click Import. And then after a couple of seconds of waiting, you might get prompted with a window asking if you want to adjust some features, and boom! Your character was successfully imported from D&D Beyond. And something else that's really cool about this mod is that it actually works both ways, meaning that you can update your character on D&D Beyond from Foundry using this mod. But don't get too excited because sadly this feature is exclusive to Patreon supporters of Mr. Primate. But if you really like this mod and want to unlock some of these other Patreon exclusive features, then I would highly recommend supporting Mr. Primate over on Patreon because he has created some amazing mods for Foundry and has put a lot of work into maintaining them. And speaking of amazing mods, we've actually reached the top 3 of my list. So without further ado, let me introduce number 3, D&D5e Animations. So if you've watched my top 10 Pathfinder 2nd Edition mods for Foundry VTT video, wow, that was a mouthful, then you might recognize this mod creator because it's actually the same guy. D&D5e Animations is a mod for all of you GMs out there that want to add super cool animations to your Foundry games, but don't want to spend hours upon hours in the automated animations menu setting up each and every animation for spells, sword attacks, and so forth. This mod adds in literally hundreds of animations, sound effects, and other awesome effects for everything from broadsword attacks to teleportation spells to magical auras, And the best part about it is that all of this requires basically zero effort on your part, besides obviously downloading the mod along with the other dependency mods. And as a quick note, this mod does require the JB2A Patreon Complete Collection in order for all of the animations to work, but if you don't have that, then that's perfectly fine because they have a free version of their mod as well, which gives you access to their basic animations. But keep in mind, if you are using that mod, then not all of the automated animations that this mod includes will work. But I will warn you that if you end up getting the free collection and trying that out, you'll most likely get an itching for more animations, and if you're anything like me, you'll probably think to yourself, okay, well how much animations does the Patreon collection even have? And then you go and look and you're like, oh, there are literally thousands of them. So I would definitely recommend going and supporting them on Patreon because you get access to their massive library of animations, which in turn makes this mod much better, which of course in turn increases the overall experience for not only yourself, but also your fellow players. But moving on, this next mod makes your job as the game master much easier and makes the experience for your players much more enjoyable. So without further ado, number 2, let me roll that for you. This mod is wonderful, especially if you're a dungeon master or a player who constantly forgets where the appropriate skill or ability check is on your character sheet, which can bog down an encounter. But fear not, because all you have to do as the dungeon master is go over to token controls, then click this little D20 symbol and select who you want to make the roll, what type of roll, and any other conditions you want to apply to the roll, and then send the request. And as you can see, there is a ton of ways you can customize this prompt and the roll you're requesting from your players. And the best part about this mod is that you can prepare these rolls ahead of time by saving the roll request as a macro. So if you want to have a macro setup that prompts all players to make a dexterity saving throw, you can easily set it up and save it so that you have it ready to go the next time the players or a player stumbles into a trap. But of course, wouldn't it be great if there was a way to automate this process? Because having players make saving throws can be a bit tedious at times, especially if you haven't already set up the macro. And especially if you're the dungeon master and you're running an encounter with multiple enemies, combat can get put on pause a lot when you're having to roll 6 dexterity saving throws because your party's wizard decided to blast a group of goblin scam artists with a fireball. But that's where my number 1 mod for D&D5e on Foundry VTT comes into play. MIDI quality of life, or MIDI quality. This mod is a definite must-have if you're running D&D5e games on Foundry VTT, plain and simple. It adds so many amazing automation and quality of life changes to Foundry that just make the whole experience of using this VTT and running sessions so much easier and intuitive. When I first got Foundry and I heard about this mod, I spent a good hour or more playing with all of the different settings and seeing what they all did and which ones I liked most. So you may have guessed this, but I won't be going over each and every setting that this mod has to offer in this video at least, because this mod is extensive to say the least. However, I do want to cover some of my favorite ones. So starting off, the colored border messages setting is super nice because it adds some much needed distinguishing features to the Foundry chat by letting you customize how each player's chat card will appear. Plus, it makes reading the chat as a dungeon master a lot easier. But then if we go into the workflow settings, pretty much everything in the GM section is super useful, especially if you want to speed up the flow of combat. And speaking of speeding up combat, let's move on to the workflow tab. So in this tab, I personally love turning on the auto target on template draw setting to always ignore defeated. This just makes casting AoE spells or effects in general so much easier and makes your job as the player a lot simpler because you don't have to go through and target every single token when you're going to be casting an AoE spell. And speaking of targeting, I like to turn on this setting as well because it means that a player has to target something in combat before they're allowed to roll, which is nice because it obviously helps clarify who is attacking what, and it's nice because it means that you don't miss out on the super cool animations. And then these settings, hits and saves, are definitely a must use because it speeds up the process of combat immensely, because it means that you as the dungeon master don't have to go flipping through rules or constantly opening, closing, and then reopening character sheets to see if something hits or not, or to see what their saving throw modifier is. This setting just takes care of all of that for you and tells you if an attack hits or misses. And on top of that, MIDI quality works with Let Me Roll That For You, the mod that I covered earlier. So you can choose between having saving throws be automatic for players or not. And I would definitely recommend using the Let Me Roll That For You plus query option because it's my favorite, and also because if a saving throw or attack roll or whatever is completely automatic for players, it kind of takes away from part of the fun because they don't feel like they're rolling to see if they pass the saving throw or not if it's automatically taken care of. You know what I mean? And lastly, I love the Reactions tab. With this setting turned on, reactions will never again go unused or forgotten, because this tab has so many useful settings for prompting and reminding players of reactions and of course, attacks of opportunity. And there are so many more settings that this mod has that I could cover, but I'll leave that to maybe a future video. I just wanted to cover my favorite ones and showcase them to you guys. And like I just said, there are a lot of settings for this mod. So does that mean that if you have multiple worlds and Midi-QOL is in each one of those worlds, you have to go to each individual one and reset or redo all of your settings again? That's pretty tedious. Well, actually, you don't have to do that. You can easily export the settings as a JSON file and then import them into another world, as long as Midi-QOL is obviously installed and enabled. But with that, everybody, those were my top 10 Foundry VTT mods for D&D 5e. I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, consider dropping a like or a comment down below in regards to some of the mods that I covered, or if I happen to miss a mod that you really enjoy. But with everybody, thank you so much for watching, and as always, I'll be sure to see you in the next video. Take it easy. Bye-bye. So, without further ado, number 2, let me roll that for you. Was that cool? I don't